I never imagined that the man who tried to burn my house down would be the same person my girlfriend once called family. But the day he threw me down the stairs, I realized exactly what I was dealing with. My name is Sam, and I'm 33 years old. I've seen a lot of darkness in my life, deployments overseas, losing friends in firefights, waking up in cold sweats wondering why I survived when others didn't. But nothing could have prepared me for the betrayal waiting for me back home. After I was medically discharged from the Army Rangers, my leg shattered by shrapnel, I tried to build something resembling a peaceful life. I moved back to my hometown near Raleigh, North Carolina, and reconnected with Mia, my high school sweetheart. Mia was the kind of person everyone liked instantly. She was warm, gentle, and had this knack for making you feel like you belonged. She had a little daughter from a past relationship, bright-eyed, curly-haired Emma, who called me Sammy within the first week. I fell in love with them both faster than I'd ever admit out loud. One evening, about 6 months after we started dating, I was staying over at Mia's apartment. It was a small second-floor walk-up, the kind where the floorboards creaked whenever you shifted your weight. I'd gotten up in the middle of the night for water when I heard it, a scraping noise on the stairs. At first, I thought it was Mia's cat, but when I peeked through the peephole, my stomach dropped. A man was creeping up the steps, mid-30s, skinny, wearing a torn-up army surplus jacket. He didn't knock. He just tried the doorknob, like he already owned the place. I grabbed my pistol from the hall table, one I kept unloaded, out of reach of Emma, and pulled the slide back to chamber around. The noise made him freeze. Then, unbelievably, he shouted Mia's name like I was the one intruding. When Mia came to the door, her face went pale. "Oh God," she whispered. "Lucas." That's when I learned the truth. This wasn't her brother. This was some guy she used to work with at a gas station when she was 19, a strung-out drifter she'd given a sandwich to once, years ago, and he had latched onto her ever since. He started ranting about how she owed him, how she was his family, and all he had left. I kept my gun lowered but ready, heart pounding. Emma woke up crying down the hall. Mia, God bless her naive heart, told me to put the weapon away. She said Lucas had nowhere to go, that he was harmless. "He's just having a rough time," she pleaded. "Can we let him stay for a night or two?" I knew this was a terrible idea, but part of me, the part still trying to be the man Mia needed, said nothing. I unloaded my gun and put it away, and that was the start of everything unraveling. Lucas moved himself in like he'd been paying rent all along. He claimed the couch, then Mia's spare room. He demanded food, cigarettes, money. He never said thank you, never lifted a finger to help. And Mia, bless her, she felt sorry for him. She cooked for him, bought his groceries, even let him watch Emma while she picked up extra shifts. I tried to be patient. I tried to remind myself that compassion was part of why I loved her. But the resentment grew anyway. One night, while Mia was at work and Emma was at her father's for the weekend, I came back from a late grocery run. Lucas was sitting in the kitchen with a beer in one hand, watching a football game on Mia's laptop. "Hey," he slurred, not even looking up. "You gonna do those dishes?" I stopped in the doorway. "What?" "The sink's full. You should wash 'em," he said, waving his bottle. "Since you don't pay rent." Something in me snapped. All the deployments, the sacrifices, the months of therapy to get my nightmares under control. I'd never felt rage this raw. "Go to hell," I spat. I turned to leave, not trusting myself to say more. That was when he attacked me. The next thing I knew, Lucas was charging across the kitchen, teeth bared like a cornered animal. He slammed both hands into my back, hard enough that I stumbled. My foot missed the top step, and then I was falling. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the cold concrete coming up to meet my skull. When I came to, bleeding on the pavement, I realized this wasn't going to stop. He wasn't going to leave until he'd taken everything from me. I don't know how long I was out, probably just seconds. But when I opened my eyes, I could taste copper in the back of my throat. My vision swam, flickering between black and bright white. I tried to move and felt fire shoot up my left side. The concrete under me was cold, and for a split second, I thought I was back in Kandahar, lying on the rocks after the mortar blast. But then Lucas leaned over me, his breath reeking of stale beer. He knelt and pressed his hand to my chest, like he was making sure I was still breathing. Then he stood up and wiped his palms on his jeans. He didn't say a word. He just walked back upstairs, as calmly as if he'd stepped outside to smoke a cigarette. I lay there, gasping, wondering if he'd come back to finish me off. When he didn't, I crawled to my truck. My hands were slick with blood where my head had split open on the step. My leg throbbed with every inch I dragged myself. I don't remember starting the engine. I don't remember how I made it to the emergency room. All I know is, sometime after sunrise, Mia arrived in the hospital waiting room, eyes wide with horror. "Oh my God, Sam," she whispered. She rushed to my bedside, her hands fluttering helplessly over the bruises on my face. "What happened?" I told her everything. How Lucas had shoved me down the stairs, how he'd stood there watching me bleed. Her face turned pale. She didn't try to defend him this time. But when the nurse asked if I wanted to file a police report, Mia grabbed my wrist. "Please don't," she begged. "If he gets arrested, I don't know what he'll do. What if he comes after Emma?" It took everything in me not to snap at her. He already had come after me. And next time, it might be her or Emma who ended up in the hospital. But I was tired. Tired of fighting. Tired of bleeding for people who wouldn't protect themselves. So I let it go. I went back to my apartment that night. Mia came over to help me change my bandages. For a moment, I thought maybe she finally understood. That maybe she'd make him leave. But the next day, Lucas came swaggering back into her place like nothing happened. He even had the nerve to smirk at me when we crossed paths in the parking lot. 2 days later, Mia called me crying. Lucas had given her an ultimatum. If she didn't break things off with me, he'd leave and take the only stable father figure Emma had ever known. He said you make the house feel unsafe, she sobbed. He says you're dangerous. I almost laughed at the insanity. Dangerous? The man who nearly broke my spine was calling me dangerous? But I knew what was happening. Lucas was a parasite, and he was scared I'd finally convinced Mia to cut him off. So he twisted everything. He painted himself as the victim and me as the threat. And to my horror, she believed him, at least enough to waver. I just need some time to think, she whispered. It's too much. I wanted to scream, to shake her, but what would that have accomplished? So I swallowed my pride, told her I understood, and hung up. I sat alone in my apartment for hours, listening to the clock tick. Later that night, she sent a single text. I'm sorry, Sam. I can't do this. And that was it. The end of the best thing that had happened to me since I came home. The next morning, I boxed up the little things she and Emma had left behind. Emma's stuffed bunny, the coffee mug Mia always used, a pair of pink socks I bought her daughter. I thought I'd drop them off at her work, maybe say goodbye properly. But I never got the chance. Because Lucas wasn't done with me. A week later, I came outside to find my truck balanced on cinder blocks. All 4 tires gone. My windshield smashed. Somebody had spray-painted slurs across the hood in neon orange. I called the police this time. They came, took photos, nodded sympathetically, and promised to file a report. But I could tell by their faces they didn't expect much to come of it. I didn't either. That night, as I swept the broken glass out of my truck bed, I realized something. I wasn't safe anymore. Not here, not anywhere he could find me. And the worst part was, Mia still wouldn't believe he was capable of this. I went to bed with a baseball bat propped by the door. And for the first time since I left the army, I wished I'd never come home at all. I thought he'd finally run out of ways to hurt me. But the night I woke up to flames licking under my door, I realized Lucas was willing to go further than anyone imagined. It was a Wednesday night. I'd finally started to feel almost normal again, sleeping through the night, going to work, telling myself maybe Lucas had moved on to someone else to torment. I just drifted off when a sharp crack jolted me awake. For a split second, I thought it was another mortar, some buried reflex from Afghanistan kicking in. But then I smelled smoke. I stumbled out of bed, heart thundering. Through the peephole, I saw a flickering light dancing under the doorframe. My brain refused to process it. Then came the smell of burning plastic, and the realization he'd set my door on fire. I grabbed my phone and punched in 911, voice shaking as I gave my address. My hands were already moving on autopilot, pulling the fire extinguisher from under the sink, aiming it at the base of the flames. My lungs filled with chemical mist as the white foam smothered the fire. By the time the fire department arrived, the sprinklers had activated, soaking everything in my front room. But I was alive. The fire chief gave me a grim look. If you hadn't woken up, you wouldn't have made it out. That thought followed me all the way to the police station when they brought me in to make a statement. They asked the same questions over and over. Did I have enemies? Had I noticed anyone following me? Did I owe money to someone? I told them the same name every time, Lucas Harrington. One of the officers jotted it down and gave me a pitying look, like I was just another broken vet who couldn't let go of old grudges. But another cop, older, with deep lines around his eyes, leaned in close and said quietly, get a camera system. And a dog, if you can. Because guys like this, they don't stop until somebody makes them. I went back to my apartment around dawn. The hall reeked of smoke and wet plaster. My doormat was a blackened husk. And somehow, seeing that stupid melted mat was what finally broke me. I sank down against the wall and put my head in my hands. That was when my phone buzzed. It was Mia. She'd heard about the fire. Her text was short, but I could feel her fear through the screen. Sam, did you do this yourself to frame him? He says you're obsessed, that you're dangerous. I felt something inside me go ice cold. Even after everything, even when I nearly burned alive, she was still giving him the benefit of the doubt. I didn't respond. That weekend, I moved my valuables into a storage unit and started staying with a buddy from my old unit. I knew I couldn't keep living there. Not when every creak of the building made my heart race. 2 weeks passed without incident. I thought maybe Lucas had finally backed off. I was wrong. I came home from work late one evening, just stopping by the apartment to grab some clean clothes. As I turned into the lot, my headlights swept across a familiar silhouette, Lucas. He was crouched by my front door, fumbling with something that gleamed in the light, a gas can. I didn't think. I hit the brakes, threw the truck in park, and jumped out. He saw me and took off, sprinting toward the back stairwell. I chased him halfway around the building before he slipped into the alley and vanished. My lungs were burning, my legs screaming in pain, but I kept going until I couldn't anymore. When I finally limped back to the apartment, there was a smear of gasoline across my threshold. That was it. No more warnings. No more hoping he'd stop on his own. The next morning, I drove straight to the precinct and filed for a restraining order. I gave them everything: texts, photos, hospital records. This time, the detectives looked genuinely alarmed. 3 days later, they picked Lucas up on an outstanding warrant from a different state. The same day, Mia called me again. Why are you doing this? She sobbed. You're ruining everything. I pressed the phone to my ear, trying to find the right words. But there weren't any, so I hung up. That night, for the first time in months, I slept without waking up to check the locks. When I saw Lucas being dragged into court in shackles, part of me hoped it was finally over. But I was about to learn some monsters never stop clawing at you, even from behind bars. The arraignment was surreal. The prosecutors laid it all out. Stalking, assault, arson. One by one, they recited every time he tried to hurt me. Every time I'd been too scared, or too loyal to Mia, to press charges. Lucas didn't look at me once. He just stared at the floor, jaw twitching, like he was the victim in all this. When the judge announced he'd be held without bail, I felt my chest loosen for the first time in what felt like years. I thought Mia might finally see who he really was. But when I walked out into the hall, she was waiting for me. Her eyes were red, makeup streaked across her cheeks. "You're a monster," she whispered. "You've destroyed my family." Her family. That word felt like a slap. "I didn't destroy anything," I said quietly. "He did." She shook her head. "You could have let it go, but you had to make it worse." And then she walked past me, out of the courthouse, without another word. I should have felt angry, but mostly I felt empty, like there was nothing left to feel. Over the next few weeks, the calls stopped. The threats stopped. The nights of lying awake, clutching my pistol, started to fade. But the damage was still there, under my skin, in my head. I tried therapy. I tried telling myself it wasn't my fault. Some days, I believed it. Some days, I didn't. 6 months later, the trial finally started. The prosecutor built the case brick by brick, photos of my scorched door, recordings of Lucas threatening me, my medical records from when he threw me down the stairs. I testified for nearly 3 hours. My voice shook the entire time. When I stepped down, I couldn't bring myself to look at Mia sitting behind the defense table. I knew what I'd see, that same cold disbelief, that same refusal to admit she'd let a predator into her life and mine. Lucas never testified. His lawyer tried to argue he was unstable, that he didn't understand what he was doing. But the evidence was overwhelming. The day the verdict came, I didn't want to be there. But I made myself go. I needed to hear it with my own ears. The judge read the charges one by one. Guilty, guilty, guilty. Assault, attempted arson, stalking, criminal conspiracy. Lucas barely flinched. The sentencing hearing was the first time he looked at me. Just for a second. His stare was flat, empty, like he was already gone inside. I wondered if that was how he'd looked at the world his whole life. He got 28 years. No possibility of parole for the first 20. The bailiff led him away in handcuffs. Mia stood up and followed him out, never sparing me a glance. I walked out of that courtroom into the cold morning air and felt nothing. No triumph. No closure. Just the knowledge that it was finally over. You'd think sending your stalker to prison would be the end of the nightmare. But sometimes the scariest part is what comes after, when everyone else moves on, and you're the only one still living in the wreckage. It took me almost a year to feel normal again. I moved to a new apartment in a different part of town, switched jobs, changed my phone number. I got rid of the old furniture, anything that reminded me of that night with the Molotov cocktail. I tried to build something resembling peace. Some nights I still jolted awake, sure I'd hear footsteps in the hall. But slowly, the memories stopped strangling me every time I closed my eyes. Mia never contacted me again. I heard through a mutual acquaintance that she packed up and moved to another city with her daughter. She'd found a new job, a new apartment, a new life. I hope it was better than the one she'd left behind, even if she decided I was the villain in her story. Maybe that's what people do to survive. They rewrite the truth until it's something they can live with. A few months after the sentencing, I started seeing a counselor for my PTSD. I didn't think it would help, but it did, more than I could have imagined. I learned that just because you survive something doesn't mean you're healed. That sometimes the bravest thing isn't fighting back. It's allowing yourself to feel everything you were too numb to feel when it was happening. The nightmares didn't stop completely, but they got less frequent, less sharp. I rebuilt my life brick by brick. I met someone new, someone patient enough to understand why I locked the doors 3 times before bed and why I sometimes stared into the dark for no reason. Her name is Natalie. She has this way of listening that makes you feel like you're the only person in the world. We started slow. I didn't trust myself to fall for anyone again, but she never rushed me. Last year, we got engaged. Sometimes I look at her and think about everything it took to get here, the years of chaos and fear and loss, and how, even after all that, I still found love again. I still don't know what became of Mia's brother in prison. The system doesn't exactly send you newsletters. Part of me used to worry he'd get out early, that he'd come looking for me. But recently, I got an answer I didn't expect. A mutual friend sent me a link to an obituary. Lucas had died in prison, something about an altercation with another inmate. No more details. I thought I'd feel relief, or vindication. Instead, I just felt tired, like it was one more door finally closing. After all this time, I've realized something important. Survival isn't about forgetting. It's about refusing to let the worst things that happen to you define the rest of your life. I'm not the guy who was nearly burned alive, or the guy who shot 3 people in self-defense, or the guy who lost the love of his life because she couldn't accept the truth. I'm just a man who refused to stay broken. And if you've ever been through something like this, know that you aren't alone. You can walk away. You can heal. You can build something better. I did. And I won't apologize for any of it. Or so I thought.